After 9/11, the FBI was charged with preventing the next terrorist attack. But the problem they had was, how do you know who is going to do the next attack? How do you prevent it? And so what they began to do is try to identify people who, as they said, had a potential for violence. And then they would focus in on these people who were Muslim and who often had sort of called attention to themselves by using loose or casual, violent language. And they would use false, bogus charges or pretext charges in order to arrest them and lock them up. And it was done to preempt them from doing any, creating a crime in the future. And that's why we call it preemptive prosecution. One of the things that the FBI does to incarcerate people preemptively is to essentially criminalize normal activity, which none of us would think of as criminal. For example, if you donate to a charity, most of us think of that as something that's laudable, it's good, we should be all doing that. But if by chance some of that money goes to a terrorist organization or a group that the government doesn't like, they will call that material support for terrorism, even if you didn't know that that organization was bad. And probably the worst example of that was the Holy Land 5. This was a Holy Land Foundation was a group that was donating money, actually was raising money in America and donating it to help support the folks in Palestine. And although the government conceded that not a nickel of that money ever went to support a terrorist organization, the directors were accused of, by building schools and hospitals in Palestine, raising the prestige of Hamas, and that was material support for terrorism. And two of the directors were sent to jail for 65 years for doing nothing else except trying to relieve suffering in the Middle East. Our organization, the CCF, Coalition for Civil Freedoms, has been donating $100 a year to a group of Muslims that were in jail under preemptive prosecution. And we have about 200 of them on the list right now. The list is always changing. There are some that get off that are out of jail now and some that have been on later, but we have about 200. And a number of those are actually there for life. They have received life sentences for what is essentially preemptive prosecution. CCF has decided that the time is ripe to end this abuse of preemptive prosecution. It's wrong to convict people who have not committed crimes. It's wrong to convict people preemptively, as though they might commit a crime in the future. And that's true for society in whole. It's not just the Muslims, and there are people who are not Muslims that are also being preemptively prosecuted. So it is a principle that is very important that we uphold. So CCF has created a bill called the Entrapment and Governmental Overreach Relief Act, which we call the Ego Relief Act, and which we're going to try to get a bill through that will prevent the FBI from doing this kind of activity in the future, and will also make it retroactive so that these old cases will be brought back into court and they can be judged again. And we believe in the new climate that seems to be slowly spreading across America, where there's less fear of Muslims, less fear of terrorism, that the judges will throw these cases out and release a lot of these people from prison. The bill itself is going to be targeted at three particular things. One is entrapment.
Right.
Entrapment is a big issue, which is one of the strategies that the government uses. They will, once they have you on their screen for preemptive prosecution, they will assign an agent to go and try to become this person's best friend and hang out with them, spend years, literally years. We've had some cases that went as long as 6 years. Where they just hang out and secretly follow you around with a tape recorder trying to talk you into criminal conspiracies. We've had cases where the FBI agent actually moved into the person's house and lived there for months at a time. This is such a violation of our personal privacy, of having the government, all over us, that this sounds as a common sense bill to say you can't do that. We've also put in a provision in this bill to say that material support for terrorism, if you're going to charge somebody with material support for terrorism, at the very least you ought to be able to prove, or you have to prove, that the target intended violence. Otherwise it's a trap for people who were donating to charity, who were trying to do the right thing. And the final aspect of this bill is to say, during a trial, on a terrorism trial, the government should not be allowed to give classified evidence to the judge ex parte without showing it to defense cleared counsel. This happens in virtually all the preemptive prosecution cases, where the government essentially tips the balance in favor of the prosecution unfairly by showing selected evidence to the judge ex parte without the defense having a chance to see it. And it is so contrary to all our notions of fairness in America that, again, that practice should be banned also.
So my brother is Yusuf Wihili. He's a political prisoner and victim of preemptive prosecution. In December of 2015, Yusuf met a good Muslim brother from Atlanta who turned out to be an undercover agent who sought my brother's conviction. The FBI admitted that they targeted Yusuf for a terrorism investigation. And under the current FBI guidelines, the FBI can authorize an informant and other surveillance techniques without any factual basis for criminal activity or even particularized suspicion of criminal conduct. So the FBI's preventative policing method identifies, factors that may lead one to become radicalized. And there are various factors which, according to a really great Intercept article on the FBI's secret scoring system, include religious observance of one, how practicing of a Muslim one is, their travel history, what countries that they've traveled to, particularly countries like Yemen, Syria, and Libya. They're countries that the FBI has flagged. They also consider the mental background, the financial background. So all these various factors are part of the FBI's profiling technique on determining who is a potential suspect. The Department of Justice has very strict guidelines on prohibiting profiling based on race, but there is no explicit ban on religion or national origin. Therefore, which gives law enforcement officials very broad discretion in profiling, and essentially they can target individuals based on their religion or their national origin. And my brother was targeted for his travel history, traveling to Yemen and Egypt, and his ethnic national background. Although we were born and raised Americans, our families are from Somalia. So there was various other factors that flagged Yusuf for an ideal, quote unquote, FBI, for an ideal FBI investigation. And from December 2015 until July of 2016, Yusuf was under daily and constant surveillance by the FBI. They tapped his phone, there was drones that followed him, there was cameras that were placed along the street in our, where we lived, monitoring who entered and who left our home. There was even a FISA intercept that was placed inside of our home, listening to very intimate conversations. The Somali community has been particularly impacted as I think the Black immigrant and Muslim community in America, it is particularly vulnerable. There is a direct correlation with U.S. foreign policy and U.S. military action abroad and the nature of who is targeted for domestic prosecutions in the United States, as well as immigration policies that target certain groups. So it's very related, and the U.S. has been conducting a hidden war, essentially, in Somalia, of both covert and overt operations. And recently, under the Trump administration, he has dramatically increased airstrikes in Somalia. So the Somali community here is highly policed and surveilled as a result of just U.S. policy on this community. And I think if you look at Minnesota with the largest Somali population, you'll see that that community has been especially targeted by preemptive prosecution. There's several cases that come out of Minnesota. One of the biggest, and I think highly profiled cases is the Minnesota ISIS trial, which the media has dubbed. And it involves about 9 Somali young American boys between the ages of 19 and 22 who are all charged with material support. And I'll focus on 6 of the defendants. They were all friends. They grew up in the same area, and one of their friends turned into an informant. And the recorded audio conversations between these friends became the basis of their criminal, became the basis of their charge. And this friend turned informant was paid over $100,000 by the FBI for his services. And 3 of the boys, and they were charged with allegedly planning to travel to Syria to join ISIS. And the audio conversations, along with their social media and their online activity, became the basis of the charge. There was no other evidence. They had no evidence to commit any violence, to murder anyone. So it's all just these conversations. And 3 of the defendants pled guilty and were sentenced to 10 years, and the other 3 that went to trial were also convicted by an all-white jury that deliberated for, I think, 2.5 days, and they were sentenced to 30 years each. And that case became like the justification for increased counterterrorism funding, counter-violent extremism programs in Minnesota and this case was referenced as the reason why there needs to be more funding for counterterrorism, and it has resulted in increased policing and surveillance of the Somali community in Minnesota. So it varies. If my brother's case and the Minnesota case I just mentioned, it's about 7 to 8 months is how long their entrapment cases lasted. There's one egregious case of Nicholas Young he's also from the DMV area. He's a former law enforcement official, and the FBI was surveillancing him for over 6 years. For over 6 years, they sent various people posing as friends to spy on him and to set him up. And they eventually charged him with material support as well for sending $245 gift cards to a friend who was an informant. And this was a friend of his for, I think, over 2 years, or who he thought was his friend. And he was sentenced to 15 years in prison for that. And he committed no violent act, nothing. Yeah. So there's, I think, 2 things that we have to be vigilant about is, 1, not becoming an informant and not working with the FBI and not being, lured into this with the money or with prior charges. Oftentimes, the FBI, tried to coerce individuals that have, prior charges and whatnot. But there's other cases that demonstrate that even individuals that work with the FBI are later entrapped by the FBI. But the first thing we can do is not talk to FBI agents ever. Don't ever speak to an FBI agent without a lawyer. You have a constitutional right to remain silent, and please do so. It never helps to talk to the FBI. If they are not your friend, and the FBI can lie to you while you you cannot lie to the FBI. And once you have a conversation with an FBI agent, it opens a record, right? Everything that you say is recorded. And if there's any discrepancy, or if there's anything that's contradictory that you may say then or may say in the future, that constitutes as lying and is punishable up to 5 years in prison. So it's very dangerous, and it's not worth ever doing. There's plenty of free lawyers that you can call that will help you if you are ever approached by an FBI agent at home. If you're approached by an FBI agent at your workplace, just say, please give me your card and I'll have my lawyer contact you. don't ever speak to them. And I think the second thing you can do is just be mindful of what you say. You know, with the case I mentioned earlier with the Minnesota boys, it was their friend that was their informant. So be very wary about who you confide in and who you vent or rant to about various opinions that you may have. You know, it's very unfortunate that's the case, but don't speak, you know, carelessly or openly with anyone. Be very mindful of your words, and also be mindful of your online presence and social media. Be wary about, you know, what profiles that you're looking at, what websites that you are on, the videos that you're watching. They're all being watched and recorded and is often used as a targeting tool. Like I mentioned with my brother and a lot of these boys, they come under the attention of the FBI from their online activity. And as a victim of like sort of this surveillance state that we live in, it's very easy to be, you know, afraid to do anything. And I think, I don't want to preach, you know, to the choir, but one thing that has helped me is once you realize, oh, the FBI is watching or the FBI is listening to me, you know, having an intercept in your home where, you know, every action is being recorded. It's a very traumatic experience, but it's a reminder that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that God is, you know, watching all, like the all-seeing, the all-hearing is witnessing all, and the judge of all judges is seeing all. So at least if this can, I guess, hope to inspire us to be more God-conscious, you know, if the FBI's harassment has increased, you know, somewhat of your taqwa in a way, let it be a reminder of that, inshallah.
In 2014, a group that I'm associated with, CCF, wrote a report about all of the preemptive prosecution cases. We categorized them, we listed them, and we showed that the government from time to time comes out with a list of terrorists that were convicted under their preemptive prosecution. And we showed that of those terrorist cases that they were claiming, some 94% of them involved elements of preemptive prosecution. In other words, there's only 6% that we could have said were real threats to America. All the rest were basically concocted by the government. So we put out that report along with our recommendations for things that should be changed. And now, in connection with the Ego Relief Act that we're about to put out, we are reissuing that report with updated statistics to show that the same problem is going on. The statistics are just about the same now as they were in 2014, 5 years ago. In other words, in some sense, nothing has changed. The government is continuing to do this, to take innocent people, put them in jail, and claim that they were real terrorists, and they're not.